Greetings, everyone. My name is Omar Ryan. I am the Communications and Events Coordinator at the PJ Patterson Institute for Africa Caribbean Advocacy. And today I will be having discussions with the Most Honourable Professor Kenneth, a very distinguished son of Jamaica and the Caribbean at large, who has served outstandingly in the fields of education and public service for many decades. He served as principal for the Mona campus and Governor General for Jamaica, and would have served in the field of education, not just in Jamaica, but also in the United States of America, where he has contributed wonderfully, including several publications. The Most Honorable Kenneth is no stranger to a lot of us. So, welcome, Professor Hall.
Thank you very much.
And how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. It's Monday morning after Father's Day, so
Yes, yes, yes. So, happy Father's Day to you.
Thank you very much.
Belated, of course.
Thank you.
Okay, so Professor Hall, can you tell us a little about who you are and where in Jamaica you are from?
I am a Jamaican, a nationalist Jamaican, but I also have multiple identities as a regionalist, unrepentant regionalist. I am a black nationalist, which guides my actions. I don't necessarily preach it, but it guides my decision making in many respects. And I'm a historian by training, but one who has worked in development work and in higher education. I am from Hanover, went to Overseas High School, and I was here at this university. I received my first degree as a history honors student here, and then went on. I'm one of the peculiar persons who entered higher education and never left because I went on from here to Trinidad, then to Queen's University, and have stayed in higher education the rest of my working life.
Thank you very much, sir, for that. And I'm sure people from Anova and Western Jamaica are very proud of your achievements over the years. Uh, our main discussion today is about the integrationist. And as you just mentioned, you are an unrepentant integrationist. And I have observed that many outstanding men from your era, I would say, persons who witnessed the independence fervor and era across the Caribbean and the unification from Carifta to CARICOM and now CSME are ardent regionalists. So do you think that the time you were born and raised, the education you had access to rather, it really influenced your who you are today as an integrationist?
I am glad you raised that because as I said, I'm a Jamaican. But early in my education process, I was also exposed to regional. At high school, in fact, two, at least two of my teachers were from outside Jamaica. There was Mary Morgan, who worked at this university for years, and there was Shirley Field Ridley, who perhaps had the greatest influence on me as a student because she was my history teacher and she introduced West Indian history to the school and to me personally. It was also the period of federation. And so most people had a position on federation and integration, pro or against. I was one of those who was pro, for all kinds of reasons as you imagine. The school I went to, the headmaster, Eric Frater, was very much both a nationalist and an integrationist, or prominent process. But my exposure and my dedication to regional integrations really took place at this university as a student.
Mhm.
Like others, when I came to this university, it was a single campus. And so before long, you we were immersed in discussions about the region with people from across the region, from Trinidad, Guyana, Barbados, Grenada. So you could not help having a regional sensitivity. Beyond the immersion, as that's by living together, having discussions, there were courses that specifically dealt with that. And I happened to be one of the students of Professor Roy Auger, the late Professor Roy Auger, who introduced a course called Cooperation, Integration, and Closer Union, a title like that in history, in my final year. And that was just after the Federation, but he felt that integration and the movement towards integration in the region did not die with federation. And so it became both an intellectual and academic preoccupation of some of us, as well as a lived reality, because then we started going to different parts of the region. I, for example, spent my first year as a graduate student and as a first teaching job in in Trinidad.
Okay. Okay.
And after that, I left the region, but that's part of it.
Yeah, yeah, that's form the foundation.
Yes.
Yes, okay, okay. Thank you.
And if I may, to give you an indication of the depth of it, one of the papers that I wrote when I did international relations was about federation. And later I developed it into a publication so that stayed with me even after I had completed.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much. What I would say, strong foundation in regionalism and Caribbean integration. Okay. th- Okay, so the main purpose of our interview today is about the Integrationist, a series of publications that I think you are responsible for. I think I counted 42 books on the website and three different documentaries, and there are other publications as well. And so, what is the Integrationist?
Well, the integration is simply a vehicle
Mhm.
for collecting the material and promoting it and overseeing the publication of those books.
Okay, okay, okay.
I call it the integrationist because I wanted to emphasize integration, that this was about integration of the Caribbean.
Yeah, yeah. When I first saw it, I really liked the name. It was straightforward. You don't have to guess what this is about.
Yes.
Integration. And when you look at the title of some of the books, I think one of the titles is Integrate or Perish.
Yes.
And when you see those titles, this is what we are about. Uh, so thanks much. You have been charged with the role as a patron at the PJ Patterson Institute for Africa Caribbean Advocacy. How would you describe your role as patron at the PJ Patterson Institute and how acquiring the integrationist to be a part of the institute helps that role as patron?
Well, I'm honored that Most Honourable PJ Patterson would have elevated me to the post of patron and to join the other patrons as you know, was former president of Nigeria, former president of South Africa, and the distinguished ambassador Andrew York. So to sit in that um, distinguished group is in itself an honor without anything else. But in understanding my role, I need to go back beyond just the appointment. My academic preparation and teaching happened to have been in both areas, Africa and the Caribbean. Few people know that both my master's thesis and my PhD dissertation are on South African history. And my early writings were very much about what was happening and the legacy of colonialism in South Africa and the, the oppression, if you might call it, of Africans. And so my early African writings and history were about those, and that those were published and so on. But I was also a Caribbean person. And so early in my teaching career at the State University of New York, I developed the Caribbean side of it, taking students, for example, to Jamaica, um, to give them exposure to Jamaica, taking students to Washington, to the model OAU, where universities from across the United States would meet at Howard University once a year to debate the issues that were affecting Africa at the time. Okay. Each university picked a country, and you spoke from the position of that country. Okay. At the OAU. And at the same time, when we went to Washington, we called it the embassies. And so it was a gathering. So the students were exposed not only to students from other places, but had an in-depth exposure to Africa and African leaders, what they were doing. So, okay. So that's part of my. Okay. The other part, of course, is the Caribbean. When I returned to the Caribbean, I joined the CARICOM Secretariat as Deputy Secretary General and then came to home as principal. But it struck me when I arrived on this campus that that early period of the 1970s, when integration and so on, development studies, was Caribbean development, were issues that were debated widely and very rich, had disappeared on the campus. And so the leadership of the university in this area had declined. And so I felt it was an obligation, if you wish, but it was also something which I enjoyed, was to start rekindling the spirit with a number of activities. I had an annual conference called the Mona Academic Conference, and most of them centered around Caribbean issues. We invited prime ministers and speakers from other parts of the Caribbean to come. We then published those. Professor Ben, in particular, and I published those, and they are uh, on the website. But in addition to that, I realized there were no courses. And when I asked, they said there were no books to teach a course in at this campus on Caribbean integration. I was appalled, I must confess. Yeah. And so I set out as a committed Caribbeanist, to provide material so that courses could be revived. And I was very pleased that it was done in the Faculty of Social Sciences. And after that, then the books became basic reading material in all of the faculties. So that's so in coming to the Patterson Institute of Africa and Caribbean
Advocacy.
advocacy, this fits exactly into my own life work.
Okay. And I do agree. I do agree. And thank you for that contribution because students of the UWI will now be able to access these materials through the website of the PJ Patterson Institute. And my next question is, how do these publications contribute to our understanding of their subjects or fields?
Well, there is an alignment, if you wish, between the objectives of the Patterson Institute and the themes in these books. For example, there's a shared vision about integration between the two.
Yes.
We at the Institute are involved in integration at this level, but also between Africa and the
And
Caribbean.
Caribbean.
There we have similar views. The publications emphasize people-centered development. That is a development that will be inclusive
Yes.
of people. And much of the work is at that. So the advocacy from this institute on those issues will have intellectual foundations and will have a framework for doing so. Beyond that, there are some other themes that are common to the Patterson Institute and uh, the the publications. For example, there's advocacy and policy influence. Much of the work in these books are policy and advocacy. When you read, they were advocating Caribbean integration. They were advocating the development of the region and getting together in a united way to improve the conditions of the Caribbean. Most of the books are therefore the substance of advocacy, if you wish. And the books and the works also has a theme on, or they have a theme on institutional collaboration. And so, as patron and having had direct influence and exposure, I think the my background and the work there will fit into it's one of the central themes of the institute. That is institutional collaboration.
Okay, thank you very much, Sir Professor Hart. Very wonderful insights you've been given here on the foundation of the integrationists. I never knew that there wasn't any course at the university that promoted regional integration. So I'm really glad that you've been integral in helping to develop that part of the academic life of the university campus. Because personally, I think it's very important that students, in particular young people, have an idea of where this region is coming from. We are not just Jamaica and Trinidad and Guyana and Barbados. We're actually a region, a very small region. And I think there are multiple examples across the world, the global world, from Africa itself, Europe, and other places, Asia, that show that it is very important for small countries, and not just small countries, but countries that have similar aims and objectives to work together to achieve these aims and objectives.
And this was the advocacy, the point, the theory of Caribbean integration. It came out of the development thrust works by Norman Gerver. So, uh, Dimas, Alistair McIntyre,
Yes, yes, very.
were all giants, as you were, in the field of development and,
Yes,
and
yes.
international trade in the case of McIntyre. But you also had scholars who were, I call them scholars, who were in the political arena. One of the, for me, the most satisfying part of my career was working with a group of committed individuals, as I documented in the work unit, Integrate or Perish. But to sit in a meeting with the likes of PJ Patterson, Eric Williams, um, Barrow,
Earl Borough,
Earl Barrow, and Burner,
Fabs Burnham from Guyana,
Burner, and people like,
Michael Manley.
well, Michael Manley, these were
Yes, yes.
Michael Manley, PJ Patterson was the for Sonny Ramphal,
Oh, yes, yes.
and
Sir Shudat Rampal.
yes, but you had therefore the meetings were more than just policy. They were laced with depth of understanding of the region and a deep commitment to use the resources, unite the resources for the upliftment of the Caribbean people, and to have a place at the table in the international forum. Um, and you see this, if I may just at this point, you see this, for example, in the negotiations with Europe, where the Caribbean, those leaders, especially Ram, Ramphal, Patterson, McIntyre, were the leaders, provided the core intellectual and diplomatic things for these negotiations.
Yes.
Moreover, they were, and the case of Patterson in particular, he initiated the movement to link the Caribbean issues with Africa and therefore to have a united front in confronting Europe. And this played such a significant part in the
Also with the ACP,
and the
Pacific
ACP.
countries as
Yes,
well.
yes. And I have written some on that as well, the founding of the emergence of the ACP, the Lome Convention, and all of that shows that this was a lived experience. They by uniting their forces and their resources, intellectual, diplomatic, they were able to negotiate as equals in Europe and brought to the table a level of intellectual preparation which surprised the Europeans on the other side.
Yes.
And that is what, more than anything else, I was concerned that would have been lost if some of these works were not written, were not preserved. So part of my motivation was to preserve those works. These were works which are of great value.
Yes.
Were in danger of being lost.
So thank you again, sir, because Marcus Garvey said that a people without knowledge of their past is like a tree without roots. And if these publications were to be lost and there would have been no reference for the 21st century Caribbean person about where we're coming from and how we got here, it would have been a total lost to the Caribbean.
Yeah, well, it's more than a loss. I read an article which really, mm, I was going to say inspired me, but it is more angry. The article was written in the renewal of the Rome Convention. And the journalist made a very insightful comment and said, As he walked around the delegations, the Caribbean delegations seemed to have lost a memory of what had been achieved, what the Caribbean groups had been able to do in the early. I know they were there just floating, depending, as it were, on the work of the Europeans, who can then set the agenda. And that was the total opposite
Yes, yes.
in the law. But because that work had not been preserved, used with good effect, they were struggling without, he felt, and I must confess, I felt the same way, that having done such exemplary work, that this was about to be lost.
Okay, so the ethos of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, I would say, was lost.
It was in danger of being
Oh,
lost.
okay, okay. And well, I agree with you because to some extent about what is happening with current leadership and students in general. I've taught at the secondary level for a few years in the field of Caribbean history and social studies, and also English at times. And I realized that our young people in general, they're not like the young people I read about in the 70s and 60s. And I would say up to even when I just started UA, well, it was roughly about 20 years ago. And we had persons like Damian Crawford,
Mm.
who was guild president at the time.
Yes.
And I guess you were principal at the time, and you
Yes, I was the
most
principal
Honourable
when he
Patterson
left. I
was
was the
Prime
principal.
Minister at the time as well.
Yes,
And so
yes.
serious protest about
It's,
student issues. That's what they were running about, student issues. But to me, it shows the spirit to lead and to advocate for something that I feel right about. I think that overall spirit, it has dissipated among our young people, particularly now. So my next question is, why is it important for students to engage with these publications? And do you think these publications will have any impact on how young people view the Caribbean?
well, I am a student of Marcus Garvey's works. And one of the central themes was that much of what he said and did was on the verge of being lost until a few scholars started.
Rupert Lewis.
Rupert Lewis, Tony Martin, Robert Hill, and so on. And what my view was that my view of it, and the same thing would apply as I was. The literature is important when there are issues that they speak to.
Mm.
On the verge of the revival, if you wish, of Marcus Garvey, Bob Marley, of course, popularized it. But it was the scholars who realized that there needs to be academic and intellectual foundations to the spirit of Black power. Remember, much of this occurred during the Black Power. 1960s. And the person who articulated those ideas passionately for a long time was Marcus Garvey. So they went back to Marcus Garvey, and hence the literature is available to us now because of that. I had the same thing will happen in the Caribbean. I mean, the students now do not have to face the struggle for independence. They do not have to struggle for basic
social justice,
social justice. Those
like
are
education,
education and so on.
healthcare.
And so those issues are not at the forefront. They are taken for granted. And so I would not expect them to be preoccupied with advocacy on that score. You mentioned the students in the 1990s, and Damien happens to be a good friend of mine, even though he got on the campus while I was with. No, he happens to be a good friend, and I have great admiration for him. But what he was saying is that students need a better deal. You cannot have a university where students are not at the center. That was his point, at least that I interpreted. And therefore, they must be provided with decent, with teaching that is cutting edge, using the latest technology. That they must be provided with decent accommodation. They must be provided with respect as a student and so on. And those ideas, even though he was protesting, yes, principal, I entirely agree with it and share those views because I feel myself that the university should be student centered, not, not anything is centered. Because when it is centered, then everything revolves around the needs of the students, their education, their social adjustment, their intellectual development, the issues that will occupy their waking hours. And that is what I feel. So I am not as concerned that they are now focusing on other things, because some of those battles have been won.
Yes, that's true.
What I suspect and what we have to prepare for are the battles to come. We are now back in periods which are very similar to the 60s and 70s on the international scene. And therefore there's need for an institute like the PJ Patterson Institute to remind people that we have a voice and we intend to use it to protect our interests. That's the link on. And when that happens, I think students become engaged because now they don't feel it. I mean, when we grew up under colonial, some of us under colonial system, it was felt you wanted to get away from it. Although many students imbibed the values of the time, but they were those. So that was a motivation. The international system as it is now leaves so many issues on the table for students. Then there are the global issues like climate change, AI, and so forth.
Yes,
And
yes.
I believe that those are the issues that will have to be
Take
spoken
it up. And
and taken up. And this is why I am delighted that the Patterson Institute has started its work on AI, the AI project which you know about.
yes, yes.
But it's also engaging on issues of education, climate change, and in particular, how Africa and the Caribbean can work together and pool their resources to be at the table and to be in the forefront of providing, therefore, an opportunity for people of African descent to meet, to be met, all their needs are to
Yes,
be met.
yes.
Yes,
Yes, to successfully meet our needs
mhm,
and lots of our wants.
yes.
So, Professor Hall, you would have answered many of the questions that I have here. Uh, but Importantly, what are some of the ways in which students or researchers might use these publications in their own work today?
Well, you have phrased the question in a futuristic. My point is that it is happening now, it's just that people are not aware of it.
Yes.
For instance, just a quick look at the citations. These books are being used extensively globally, and they are being used in courses here
At the,
at the university and uh, across. So there is that.
okay.
But what is this set of this initiative will do is to make it readily available and in a form which students are accustomed.
Yes.
When we were students, we used the library. You sat in the library for hours and you read. Now students are not going into the library. They want to have access to it in
Wherever they are
wherever they are when at
from
the
their
time.
computer
And
phones.
and so from my perspective, the greatest value of it on the Patterson Institute is to want to expose students to the objectives of the Patterson Institute, but importantly, using the technology they have, and they will find information that will satisfy their intellectual curiosity.
Well, part of the reason why we're doing this this conversation today, is to promote these publications, and we want to have students accessing the material from the PJ Patterson Institute's website.
Yes.
And so we want to use this conversation today to to make students and researchers alike know that the publications are here on the PJ Patterson Institute's website, and give a, just a gist of what they are about. And we have covered what they're about because they're primarily about regional integration and the development issues that the region had to contend with for the decades. We were on this mission of integration, and we're still on this mission of regional
Yeah.
integration, and not just regional, but global integration with Africa, because the CARICOM region has been declared the sixth region of the AU. And so these publications are very important to understanding the process and going forward. And you mentioned the issues of the day earlier of global warming and climate change and artificial intelligence. And just recently, last week in particular, the PJ Patterson Institute launched this AI hub for Africa and the Caribbean, where we will be engaging with the Lafayette College, led by Professor Hutchinson, to develop artificial intelligence that benefits the development of the Caribbean and Africa. And so my next question now, how will these publications assist in students grappling with these 21st century issues?
Well, the issues, number one, if many of the issues that they will be grappling with are already embedded in these, development issues, they haven't changed. Many of them have not changed. The context would have changed, but the question of providing justice, health, and so on, those remain permanent, pertinent issues, and those would not have changed. What the books have done is to articulate how they could be addressed in a particular period. And it seems that it, because the issues remain, looking at them will give a framework, an ideology really. Because one of the benefits of the books in general was to was to identify the ideological framework for integration and using that then to do research on other issues. Therefore, the term integrate or perish was something that was felt deeply. That, in my view, has not changed in its in what it said. If we as small countries do not integrate to protect our own interests and to advance them indeed, we are going to be marginalized.
Yes, and we're going to be swallowed up by the interest of more powerful
Yeah.
countries and players in the global affairs.
And that was the foundation of of the integration. That was part of it. But I think I want to emphasize the what what this is doing by putting it on the website because I was myself pleasantly surprised by what I saw. That is, I could go on the website and I could read a book by just a touch.
Touch.
And
Just a click.
no, for for my people of my generation, this is far ahead of what we used to do. In the past, we'd have had to go into the library and spend hours and hours. Now we can sit at home desk. And I'm suggesting that that would be the mode of information gathering for students now, that they would look at that. And so what we would take months and months to do, they can use it and get that information in a few minutes and then move on to other things.
So they can be more productive.
Far more productive and informed,
Mm.
which is what I'm emphasizing.
So, are there any new insights or perspectives for these editions that weren't available before?
Well, I wouldn't say new insights, but people, the reviews, if you look on on Amazon and other websites, these works are being extensively used. I was just looking at academia, a collection, a website for academia. And to my surprise, there were over 150 citations of people using this in their own work.
Okay.
So it is there, it is being used. The insights was that we have to continue the struggle. And Luther continued. The struggle continues, and we have to be equipped
With
to be able to continue that struggle.
yeah, equipped with information.
Yes, equipped technologically, ideologically, academically, and socially to deal with the future. And so I think these works will help, but they are foundational, if you wish, tools, so that you can start here and then move into dealing with many of the other
The
issues.
specific issues that we come
Yes.
from studying. Thank you very much, Professor. Uh, I am committed to ensuring that the students here on the Mona campus are aware that these publications are here, and not just on the Mona campus, but generally. Uh, the Institute, PJ Patterson Institute, of course, would have helped to initiate what I would call the Africa Caribbean Students Club recently with Professor Christopher Charles. And I've been in dialogue with the this student group. And when the academic year resumes, we intend to integrate them a lot in promoting this website.
I notice and I welcome that your emphasis is on students, but students are also guided by what is expected.
Mhm,
And those expectations are set by faculty.
mhm.
If a faculty member says that this is important, students will. So I suggest that you have a two-pronged approach
For sure, that's a plan. That's a plan for
to
sure.
get the faculty, because if they don't, I mean, these books have been around, some of them for 20 years. Some faculty members have used them, others haven't, don't even know that they exist.
Yes, and that's the thing. Before the academic year starts, I'll be approaching the major
Yes,
faculties to let them know that we have
okay,
these publications and they're easily accessible by
yes,
just going to the website.
yes,
That's a plan for sure. But definitely to not at the formal university level as a
yes,
prerequisite. When I when I mentioned the Africa Students Club, it's to get them
yes, yes,
advocating
yes,
and
yes,
looking at some of these issues that they can tackle at the student level
yes,
to help start discussing. Because when I just came to the university, there was the Marcus Garvey movement. And the Marcus Garvey movement helped me to understand some of the issues of the
yes,
day
yes,
that were and helped me to develop a pan-African mind, so to speak. And there's no Marcus Garvey movement, but we have an Africa Caribbean Students Club. And we think the Africa Caribbean Students Club can help to bring forth some of these objectives
yes,
and develop the character of students so them to know that we're not just individuals and Jamaicans or Bahamians on the university campus, but we're actually Caribbean people. And we're not just only Caribbean people, but we have brothers and sisters in Africa. And we have this group. And one of the things I think about us is that we are not just focusing on Africa and the Caribbean, but we are human beings concerned about the welfare of the entire world. Like, as Dr. Martin Luther King would have mentioned, a threat to justice anywhere. It's in one specific place, it's a threat to justice everywhere.
sure,
So we are concerned about welfare of oppressed peoples, but in particular Caribbean and African people and the different challenges that we have to deal with as people in the tropics and people in the south. So on that note, do you have any closing statements that you would like to say for the public?
well, I think, articulated some of the issues
Mhm.
in your previous statement. Because the point is that we are now living in a world where things happening in one part of the world affects us.
Mhm.
We kind of we might, but and we have not developed necessarily a perspective on it. Is there an African perspective on on Africa Caribbean perspective, for example, and the war in Ukraine? Yet it affects all of us. It affects us in ways which sometimes we are not even aware of. The shipping, for example, the tariffs,
Yes,
these are issues which you see that the goods are not available. You go to most of the shelves in Jamaica now, and suddenly you don't find many of the goods you could have found 6 months ago. And the question is why? And so what happens international in the international arena affects us. And so we have to find ways not only of coping, but of engaging in it so that we can have a perspective on it. And I think this is what these works more than anything else are about. that there was a Caribbean perspective, and there is a Caribbean and African perspective on the great issues of our time. And I think this, if we can leave that as a way forward, that they must continue these the search, as we said, and Luther continued, the
Yes.
struggle must continue,
Search for solution.
and the search must continue. But also, but to develop a specific one derived from our needs, our culture, and so on. And that is what I think these works will do.
Thank you very much, Most Honourable Professor Sir Kenneth Hall, a very distinguished son of Jamaica and the Caribbean. And on behalf of the PJ Patterson Institute for Africa Caribbean Advocacy, I want to thank you two for taking the time out to listen to this conversation. And I do hope that going forward that you all will go to the Institute's website. It's at www.inafrica, and we are available on social media as well. We're on X, we're on Instagram, and other platforms. So you will see not only the integrationist, but news and updates on what the Institute is currently doing and works we've been engaged with. So thank you very much. And I do invite you again, as I say, to the Institute's website. Thank you very much and see you next time.